Salutations, industrialists! I'm Mark, a producer on Gilded Destiny. For this dev diary, I am happy to announce that I have 3 of our talented artists here as special guests. We will be discussing our 2D art workflow and the various things the artists focus on when creating their art. So, without further delay, I'd like to thank Elena, Stephanie, and Timur for helping me out in this dev diary. Now, I'm pleased to introduce Elena. Greetings, Elena.
Hey everyone, I'm Yelena, a digital artist working on Gilded Destiny. I want to take you behind the scenes of my work as I dive into the process of creating historically accurate assets for the game. Specifically, I'll be talking about how I make sure that every single piece of artwork, from weapons to vehicles, is as historically authentic as possible. For me, this means deep research and respect for the period we are trying to represent. I want to make sure it reflects the true nature of the era. It's about telling a story through every item and making sure that players feel like they've stepped back in time. I also make sure to study the art and photographs from the era. This helps me understand the visual style and textures of objects better. Once I've gathered all the information, I start working on the design itself. I use all the historical references to create an authentic look, but I also need to make sure the assets works within the game's context. You can see how these historical references, like vintage hat, for example, went into the final illustration. Here you can see the process of creating a fine clothing icon, layer by layer. Each goods icon represents one of the resources that pops produce, consume, and trade in the game. Everything from coal and iron to perfume and confectionery. At the end of the day, it's all about creating a world that feels rich in history, where players can connect with the past. I'm incredibly proud to contribute to this process, and I hope that when you play Gilded Destiny, you'll appreciate the attention to detail we've put into every single asset.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, Elena. Now, I'd like to welcome Stephanie. Salutations, Stephanie.
Hi everyone, this is Stephanie, one of the artists, and I'm about to show you a brief demonstration of my process of creating the unique icons for Gilded Destiny. I'll talk about technology icons specifically, and I hope you'll find this interesting. Before I get started on the fun part of drawing the icons, our content team does the work of sourcing the references for each icon. They are usually the team behind the scenes on making sure that these are historically accurate. I've also put together an artboard to define the overall style. We wanted these to look like old published illustrations, somewhat reminiscent of a pen and ink drawings. Initially, I work in thumbnails, starting out with silhouettes to create general compositions. I tend to just work loosely on scribbles during this stage, mapping out simple shapes and proportions. I usually just use a large brush like this one from Procreate. And once I'm happy with the compositions, I move on to doing some rough sketches. During this stage, I add simple lighting and some rough details. I also try incorporating more perspective on the objects like this one here in circular saw. I switch to a 6B pencil from Procreate or this pencil brush in Photoshop with a smaller diameter. When I have fully worked out the kinks and details of the objects, I move to finalizing my work. The last stage is detail cleanup. Also, the fun part for me. I switch to a larger canvas during this stage to keep my strokes cleaner and finer. Given that these assets are mostly presented in a smaller scale, I try to simplify some details and check if the assets are readable enough with clear silhouettes. And here you can see the final output of the electric light bulb, argon lamp, circular saw, micrometer, rotary printing press, and the printing press. And that's all from me.
Thank you, Stephanie. Now, Timur. Make it so.
Greetings. My name is Timur. I am the art director on Gilded Destiny, and this will be my second narrated dev diary. This time, I want to show you the terrain illustrations I recently completed. As many of you know, GSGs tend to span the globe and cover all kinds of terrains, all of which have their own gameplay effects and need to be easily identifiable both on the map and in the menus. Having worked on plenty of GSGs at Paradox for almost a decade, I was just waiting for the content designers to want terrain art. It wasn't a question of if, but rather a question of when and how much. This is why we designed the province interface with a big slot for an image in the first place. As meticulous or idiosyncratic as the average GSG player may be, and as fun as it may be to look at graphs and spreadsheets, I think that everyone appreciates some good art to spruce up the interface. I took the size of the image, doubled it, and got to work on painting the 9 terrain images that content design wanted. First things first, why double the size? There are several reasons for this method, some of which are: 1. It makes the image more future-proof, making it usable in larger resolutions in the future. 2. When shrinking the image down to 50%, one can sharpen the details and get away with a slightly rougher painting style. And 3. It is easier to work with since it doesn't require pixel-perfect precision when painting. Additionally, the images also need to be high enough quality for Mark to show them blown up in this dev diary. So what were the 9 terrain images that content design wanted? These were coast, desert, drylands, forest, grasslands, mountains, rainforest, snowlands, and wastelands. Spoiler alert, this task did some feature creeping, and after a lot of passionate argumentation, an additional mountains image became necessary, as well as a tundra image, and some swamps. So I got to work. There were a few points of focus when painting these. The most basic one was to try to match the horizon line so that it is roughly in the same spot in all the images. Secondly, I wanted all the images to be pretty, or at least appealing to look at, no matter how dreary or desolate the terrain. A sentiment that wasn't always shared, but hey, that's the beauty of being the art director. When someone says, "Can you make it more grey and uninviting?" I can say... So let's take a quick look at these images. Coast. This one is pretty straightforward. Considering that it is supposed to be applicable to almost anywhere in the world, it did have to be rather indistinct and generic. At least I could do something interesting with the sky. Desert. This one was surprisingly fun. It was a fun little challenge to paint a seemingly never-ending distance by blending the ground with the sky. Drylands was one of my favorites. Painting the tiny tufts of grass, having the vibrant mix of colors, and adding all the tiny details made for a fun challenge. Forest. Playing with light and God rays in this image gave it a lot more life in my humble opinion. I particularly like the yellowish green color that leaves get when sunlight refracts through them. Grasslands was one of the first images I made. It is a very simple concept, so at least I could do something interesting with the sky. Snowy mountains. This image took quite some time to get right, but I'm quite satisfied with the end result. I should also mention that these images will get slightly cropped with a special mask, so some of the parts of the image with which I'm not fully satisfied with will get cropped out. Mountains. Well, then came the need for the desolate, non-snowy mountains. You know, the grey and dreary kind. At least I could do something interesting with the sky. Jungle. How do you paint a jungle where almost everything further than 20 meters away is entirely obscured, and not make it look like a claustrophobic botanical garden? Well, you find a small open space like a creek or river, and paint whatever is in the distance as indistinctly as you can get away with, letting the beholder's mind fill in the gaps. Snowlands. I doubt that many of us have ever visited a place like this, so I had to use some of my imagination and artistic license to make this image a bit more fantastical than the references I had found. Swamp. Well, the first question is which one? There is a world of difference between the swamps of North America and the ones in Europe. However, all of them are rather dreary, which is something I would rather like to avoid, so at least I could do something interesting with the sky. Tundra. This was a rather pleasant one to paint. Unlike the snowlands, there could be some budding flora as well as ice, and the moon adds a very nice northern feel to the image in my opinion. Wastelands. This is another one of those images that was meant to be desolate, but at least I could do something interesting with the sky. And there you have them, the world in a nutshell.
Thanks, Timur, and indeed it is a mixed bag of nuts from all around the world too. And there you have it, a behind-the-scenes look at how our artists are actively gilding Gilded Destiny. Thanks again to our 3 special guests on this Dev Diary. We hope you've enjoyed this Dev Diary, and as always, if you have any questions or comments, don't hold your horses and trot down to the comment section below. Lastly, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you have not done so already, add Gilded Destiny to your Steam wishlist. Until our paths converge once more, we bid thee farewell. May your destiny be a gilded one.